Hollywood sold a specific version of the Old West prostitute, the soiled dove, with a heart of gold, a red dress, an easy smile, and a life of adventure. Real records, doctors' journals, court documents, social workers' accounts, and these women's own letters tell a completely different story. This is the story the movies never showed. Number 1. The average age of entry was 16 or 17, not 25. Forget what the movies showed you. In the admission records from brothels in the mining towns of Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona between 1870 and 1890, the numbers tell a different story. Most women started in this work between the ages of 15 and 18. In other words, they were still girls, many of them away from home for the first time. And the reasons are all written down in the documents from that time. Many were running from arranged marriages set up by families too poor to support them. Others were orphans, with no one to turn to. Some crossed the country alone, chasing a job out west that simply did not exist. And there was direct recruiting. Madams waited at train stations, promising jobs as seamstresses or housemaids to girls who got off there, newly arrived and lost. That image of the mature woman who looked life in the eye and chose this path with her head held high. Hollywood made that up. What the papers from that time show is much harsher. Teenage girls who had nowhere to go. Number 2. The debt that never ended. Imagine working every single day and still owing more and more to your own boss. In the Old West, the strongest chain keeping a woman trapped in a brothel was not made of iron. It was an account book. It worked like this. The madam paid for the train ticket to town and immediately wrote the amount under the girl's name. Then came the dress, which she was forced to buy, the room, the food, the so-called protection. Everything went on the list. The debt started high on purpose, calculated, so that entire weeks of work barely covered the interest. And something new always came up: the doctor's visit, the fine for refusing a customer, the so-called administrative costs. The bill only kept growing. San Francisco court records from the 1880s show women who spent years in that life without ever paying off what they owed from the very first day. Trying to leave did not solve anything. Leaving with unpaid debt was seen as skipping out on what you owed. In practice, it was slavery disguised as a contract, set up in a place where no law said in plain words that it was illegal. Number 3, prostitution was the best paid work. But the money stayed with the madam. Imagine the United States in 1880. A woman on her own, with no husband and no family, had to support herself somehow. What were her options back then? Domestic work paid $3 to $5 a week. Textile factory work paid about the same. Teaching paid a little more, $6 to $12, and only if she was unmarried. Now get this. In a mining town, a prostitute could bring in $20 to $40 a week, 4, sometimes 8 times more than any other job available. Sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? Well, that is where things turn. The money came in, but almost none of it stayed with her. The madam charged rent for the room, took a cut for the house, and also deducted clothing and food. By the end of the month, many prostitutes who brought in a fortune were living just as poor as a domestic worker. The wealth did build up, yes. It just all went to the brothel owner, never to the person actually doing the hard work. If stories like this one catch you off guard, hit subscribe before you go. We uncover the hidden side of history every week, and the next one is just as surprising as this. Number 4, the brothel hierarchy. Forget what you saw in the movies. In the Old West, where a woman worked, decided whether she would live or just survive. At the top were the parlor houses. They had a front room, a piano playing, good drinks, and carefully chosen clients. The women there wore decent clothes, ate properly, and had some protection. That was the part of the business that made money and looked pretty. Down below was a whole different world. The cribs were wooden shacks about 6 by 9 feet, lined up on the same street, what people called the line. A woman took anyone for pocket change in 12 to 16-hour shifts with no rest. Within a few months, her health was already wrecked. And here is what nobody tells you. Most of them were not in the pretty parlors. They were in the cribs. The parlor houses were the exception, not the rule. The movies took that one glamorous little piece and sold it as if it were the life of all of them. These were 4 facts about how the system was set up. The next 4 show what it did to these women's bodies and lives. Number 5. Opium, morphine, and alcohol were on the house and not out of kindness. Imagine walking into an Old West brothel and getting a free dose of medicine. It looked like generosity. It was a trap. Medical documents and social workers' reports from the time show that madams gave laudanum, a tincture made from opium, morphine, and alcohol, to the women who worked there. The excuse sounded reasonable, pain relief, and help getting through the work. But what really happened was something else. Those substances created dependency. And once a woman was hooked, she could no longer work anywhere else because she needed the drug every single day. And who controlled the supply? The madam herself. She became the only source, the owner of the addiction, and in the end, the owner of that person's life. Researchers estimate that between 40% and 60% of prostitutes on the American frontier had some level of dependency caused by the working conditions themselves. In the end, it held them better than any iron chain. No bars, no lock. Just the need for one more dose. Number 6. The life expectancy of a prostitute in the Old West was only 31 years. Stop and think about that for a second. A woman who entered a brothel in a mining town had, on average, less than 15 years ahead of her. And that is not historical exaggeration. People who dug through cemetery records from the old American frontier found the proof written in stone. Women connected to those houses dying between the ages of 28 and 34. What killed them so young? It was not just one thing. Syphilis, with no cure at the time, advanced until it attacked the brain. Tuberculosis ran wild in those closed-up, airless rooms. There were serious infections, childbirths, and abortions, done with no hygiene at all, and violence came from both sides, from customers and even from the women who ran the houses. Add to that opium, morphine used to get through the routine, and a lot of hunger. Now get this, a married woman from the same class lived to 45 or 50. The difference was more than 15 years of life. And it was not a matter of bad luck or fate. It was the price that work charged day after day until the very last one. Number 7. Venereal diseases were an epidemic, and there was no cure. In 1880, catching syphilis was basically a sentence. There was no cure, and what doctors called treatment was almost as dangerous as the disease itself. They gave patients mercury compounds, a poison so strong it made teeth fall out, destroyed the kidneys, and attacked the nervous system, and most of the time, it did not even stop the disease from progressing. Some people said the cure killed you before the illness did. In mining towns, the problem was huge. Medical surveys from the time estimated that between 70% and 80% of prostitutes carried syphilis in some stage. In a town full of single men and very few women, contagion spread freely. At first it could be hidden, but when it reached the final stage came dementia, blindness, paralysis, and in the end, death. Some brothels even gave the women health exams, always with male doctors, to get a kind of public license. But there is one detail that says everything about that era. The customers were never examined at all. The inspection only applied to one side of the counter. Number 8. The towns where there were 8 men for every woman. Imagine arriving in a town and counting 8 men before you ran into a single woman. That is what it was like at the height of the gold and silver rush in the Old West. In Deadwood in '86, it is estimated that there were 8 to 10 men for every woman. In Virginia City, Nevada, at the peak of silver mining, the numbers were similar. This imbalance was not just some curious detail, it moved money. Where there were thousands of single miners with gold in their pockets and no women around, a huge demand was created, and the economy of the time responded the only way it knew how. Women were brought from eastern cities and even from Europe to these places. Some came looking for a better life on their own, but many were tricked with false promises or simply taken by force. The same forces that built the railroads and opened the mines also built the business that exploited these women. The American mining boom came with a human cost that almost no economics book talks about. What happened to the women who arrived to serve that army of men? Number 9. The line there was no coming back from. There is one detail about the Old West that few people stop to think about. When a woman entered that kind of life, she crossed a line, and on that side of it, there was no way back. The very society that condemned her on moral grounds was the exact same one that locked every door behind her. Respectable hotels would not rent her a room. Some churches turned her away. Marriage to a man with a good reputation, practically out of the question. And when she tried to find honest work in a store, teaching, or taking care of a family home, they demanded letters of recommendation that no one in town was willing to sign. Social reform groups from the time recorded what came next. Dozens of women tried to leave that life and start over from scratch. The community simply closed their accounts, spread their reputation around, and turned its back on them, until hunger pushed them right back to the same place they had tried to escape. In the end, the math was cruel. The same people pointing the finger were the ones keeping that door locked from the outside. Number 10. The fate of daughters born in brothels. Think about this for a second. What happened to a child born inside an Old West brothel? She had no recognized last name, no birth certificate, and almost never had anywhere to go. The orphanages of the time, almost all tied to churches, shut their doors to the children of prostitutes. With no family, no documents, and no one around, these children ended up growing up in the only place they knew, the brothel itself. Social workers' records from San Francisco between 1880 and 1900 show a chilling pattern. Those same reports point out that many of these girls had never gone to school or even left those walls. They were put to work by the madam herself when they turned 12 or 14. And many times it was the same woman who had managed their mother's life years earlier. It was exploitation passed down from generation to generation inside the same walls. The law at the time did not see it as a crime. To the system, these girls did not count as citizens and had no rights to defend. No one came looking for them because, on paper, they did not even exist. Number 11. Madams made real money, and some became respectable people. In the Old West, there was only one real way up, becoming a madam. Whoever made it to the top, owning her own house and controlling the other girl's debt, built up serious capital. But here comes the curious part. Pearl DeVere, owner of the old homestead in Cripple Creek, Colorado, wore dresses from Paris and charged $250 a night at a time when a miner made $3 a day. The whole town thought she was the richest woman around. When she died in 1887, the surprise came that fortune did not exist. There was not even enough money to pay for her own funeral, and her customers paid for the coffin. Dora Dufran, over in Deadwood, did it differently. She put the money to work, opened houses in other towns, bought property, and built one of the biggest fortunes a businesswoman made in South Dakota. That was the system. You could move up, but only the ones willing to exploit other girls to keep the capital made it to the top. In the end, the money always moved upward and stopped in very few hands. Number 12. The origin of the red light district. Have you ever stopped to wonder where that expression comes from? The answer lies on the railroad tracks of the Old West. In the late 19th century, railroads were opening up America from coast to coast, and every man who worked on the trains carried a red signal lantern. It was a work tool, and he always had it with him. When the train stopped in a small town, those men went straight to the brothels near the station. And here is the detail. They hung the red lantern outside the door. That way, if the train suddenly had to leave, the crew knew right away where to find each man. Over time, entire streets became marked by that red glow at the doors. Anyone arriving at night understood the message. That is how, according to the best-known story, the expression was born. Cities like Dodge City, Kansas, helped spread the term across the whole country. Today, historians still debate whether it really happened exactly that way. But one thing no one debates: the railroad built America and left its mark even on the way we talk. Number 13. Violence was routine, and there was no one to turn to. Imagine being assaulted and finding out that the law simply did not apply to you. That was life for prostitutes in the Old West. When a customer attacked them, they had no real way to file a complaint. In most frontier towns, a prostitute's testimony in court was treated as if it meant nothing, thrown out right away because of what they called questionable moral character. And there was more. The police themselves were often customers at the same brothels where the assaults happened, so they did not lift a finger to investigate who was beating whom. The madams, who depended on having a good relationship with the authorities to keep the business open, also looked the other way and covered up the cases. The result was a place where violence, from punches to bullet wounds, became part of everyday life, with no consequences for the attacker. And the records from the doctors who treated those brothels tell the story on their own. Signs of repeated trauma, injuries that only showed up in people who were beaten again and again, a clear pattern of systematic abuse. Number 14. Forced medical exams were a humiliation that only worked one way. Here is something a lot of people have never stopped to think about. Starting in the 1870s, several Old West towns decided to control prostitution through a licensing system that required women to undergo regular medical exams. St. Louis, Missouri, went further than any other city. There, registered prostitutes had to be examined every week by city doctors. And the shocking detail: they were the ones who had to pay for their own humiliation. The exam was invasive, done in degrading conditions, and anyone who refused lost the right to work. But here is the part nobody talks about. In no city were the customers examined, not one. The men who fueled all that demand simply did not exist in the eyes of the law. The woman's body was treated as the problem to be controlled. The man's body, on the other hand, was invisible to every rule. That one-sided logic was born there, in the American Old West, and shaped the way the subject would be handled for generations. If stories like this one catch you off guard, hit subscribe before you go. We uncover the hidden side of history every week, and the next one is just as surprising as this. Number 15. The ones who survived were the exception, not the rule. You have seen it in the movies. The Old West prostitute who saves up money, marries well, and becomes a respectable woman. It sounds nice, but it was a lie. Names like Calamity Jane or a few well-off brothel owners made it into history precisely because they were rare. Most never got a happy ending. The records from the time leave no doubt. The average woman in that line of work died between the ages of 28 and 35. Incurable disease, violence, or overdose took almost all of them before 40. In mining towns, orphanages were full of children whose mothers had died on the job. Social workers wrote down how it all ended. Women who were already sick, too weak to work, were thrown out onto the street by the brothel owners themselves. No money, no roof over their heads, no one to help. The real Old West gave almost no one a second chance. The story of the prostitute who got rich and turned her life around did exist. But it was the exception that the movies turned into the rule, so they would not have to show what really happened to almost all of them, day after day. Number 16. The diaries that survived prove the myth wrong. Among the hardest documents from that era are letters and diaries, written by women who lived in Old West brothels. Many were kept by religious missionaries who were trying to get them out of that life. And what is written there has nothing to do with what the movies showed. The pages talk about missing family, about people who did not even know where they were. They talk about constant pain that alcohol and opium barely covered up. They talk about daily humiliation, the kind that slowly erases who a person used to be. But they also talk about something no one expected. They protected one another, built networks of care that the system tried to destroy, and that survived anyway. The reality was harder and more human than any movie. Hollywood sold the brothel girl as a symbol of freedom and courage, with a heart of gold. The records tell a different story. Girls trapped in debts they could never pay, dying of disease before 35, with no law to protect them and no way out. Some managed to escape, most did not. The least we owe them is to tell the story as it really was, the way they wrote it themselves.